feel her head. And I said, baby, feel her head. She's coming. Picked her up out of the water and held her to my chest. And it was just so divinely sacred and beautiful. And there was my baby girl. And she had been born in this softness and in this sacred warmth and fuzziness and coziness and a knowing of my power and her power and the conversation we had in making that happen.
I had my children on the floor. I was on my favourite blanket that my grandmother gave me on the floor like a cat.
And I realised in that moment the potential of what our bodies can really do as women.
Like I could feel his head, I could do my own internal, like, yeah, his head, I could feel it.
I was in tears, I was just in tears and overwhelmed with gratitude.
Hi and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast, the podcast that is bringing embodied birth wisdom from women from all over the world sharing their natural birth stories. Don't forget to subscribe and download so that you can always have access to these empowering and positive natural birth stories. Hi, Natali, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here sharing my story.
Beautiful. I actually think, I was trying to think now. I've had one woman on from South Africa, who's also now a sacred birth worker. I'm not sure if I have had anyone else. You've listened for a long time. Have you heard anyone else from South Africa? I don't think.
I don't think so, actually. And the woman who you speak of is actually a dear sister of mine, and we were very instrumental in supporting each other with our births and also postpartum. So, and she is also our connection for being here today. She introduced me to your podcast. And yes, I did a little ceremony this morning to prepare myself for today, and thanked her and her lineage for also bringing me here. So, yes.
I love that. That's a beautiful connection. I didn't know. That's lovely. Wonderful. Okay, so I would love to hear your fullness of your story today, of course. I think it's going to be very inspiring for a lot of women who have had a previous cesarean to hear about your journey of choosing a home birth and even a free birth after cesarean. So you've kind of had in the birth world the two extremes, and what a wealth of knowledge. So I'm very interested and very curious to hear your story. So take us back to, becoming pregnant the first time and kind of in a nutshell, sharing a little bit about your journey and how come you ended up with the first cesarean, and then we'll dive on into your home birth after cesarean.
Thank you so much, Anna. So I love how you gave me the opportunity to also give this bit of backstory, because I actually feel that when I conceived my son, it was a very, very conscious moment. Both my husband and I were aware that we had potentially conceived a child. It was something extraordinary. And predating that, I actually went on a kind of pilgrimage to find out and heal some of my ancestral line from my mother's side, because I was born with a cesarean with my mother, and I had immense difficulties. She passed away when I was 9, in healing my menstrual cycle and issues that I had with my menstrual cycle. And the reason why I'm bringing this in is because, I feel like that I had done so much healing work and sat in women's circles, and it was just so powerful and beautiful, but I felt like there was one more thing that was missing, that I needed to discover before I could receive a baby. And so I went on this pilgrimage, I like to call it, to my home country, to South Africa, and I made sort of meetups with people who knew my mother when she was alive and younger. And I asked them a lot of questions, and they, essentially shared with me that my mother was abused when she was a child, sexually abused, and that she carried this anger with her, and she didn't actually tell anybody until telling my godmother on her when she was close to dying. She actually died of abdominal cancer, and she told my godmother that what had happened to her, and she said, "This is what killed me. I haven't told anyone." And I felt this pain in my belly, and I felt like she wanted me to know that, because I still had period pain, and I was really like, why do I still have this pain? Because I feel like I've done everything that I could possibly do. And she wanted me to know that. And so I, obviously with that information, had a journey to process and to kind of try and figure out what it was that she wanted me to do with that information. But I also had a scenario where I was sitting on the beach with my family, and I reached into the sand and I pulled out, I was thinking about her, and I pulled out of the sand on the beach a heart-shaped tiger's eye crystal. And it just was like a physical message from her, because tiger's eye is very much about being courageous and almost like having focus in the face of adversity. And then I went to Plet, where I grew up, and I met her on the beach for the first time since she'd passed. I actually physically saw her and had a conversation with her, and it felt like this magical moment of her almost stepping out of some other realm to come and just hold me and give me a message and tell me she was proud of me. And somehow I didn't really know how all of these things amalgamated to the healing, but I was away from my husband. My husband was in London, and I went back to London after all of this, and we conceived Yali, my son. And it felt like all these pieces were necessary for me to be able to receive him in a way that was just a readiness of receiving this gift. And also somehow, I think, prepared me for my birth with him, which was very painful and very traumatic, which was, I kind of call it a forced cesarean, if I'm going to choose the words, because I had very much wanted to have a home birth, and I had done a lot of planning and prep, and I also knew that I wanted support around me because I didn't have my mother there. So I invested in an amazing doula, and she was just an amazing advocate for women and birth and everything. And I worked with her, and it was during COVID, anyway, long story short, he actually ended up we were registered at 3 different trusts because he was breech. And so I was originally registered with the trust, and they had basically done a scan and said, your baby's breech. And the words of the sonographer was, you can't have your baby at home because your baby's breech. That's not allowed, were the words. And I think what was so challenging about that time as well was, I was going to these tests without my doula, without my husband, and receiving information in the hospital and then having to go and relay this information to them. And, obviously I was, it got my back up. And the moment someone tells me really in life, I think I'm just generally like this, that I can't do something, I'm like, okay, well, I will show you. But, what happened was my midwife who had come to the house did a measurement, and it's just the most ridiculous thing. It's literally like, we laugh about it now. We call it the IKEA tape measure. It's one of those measures that they just put on your belly, and through doing that, decide that your baby is too small or your placenta is too small. And so up until that point, I wasn't even going into, to the hospital for anything. But she had basically marked down that I needed to now go in to check that everything was okay. And when I went in, they had basically said, your baby's too small, your placenta's failing, we have to have a C-section right now. And I was just like, this is unreal. I can't possibly fathom this. I can't process this information. The consultant came in, and then I went, I just said, look, I'm not doing this now. This doesn't feel right. And I went to my husband, who was waiting in the parking lot, to tell him all of it. And so we went to register with a different trust. And ironically, this trust was, I didn't tell them anything about the information from the previous trust. And they had done a measurement with the little thing to tell me that my baby was too big 2 days later.
Oh my God. Wait, how many weeks were you at this point as well?
Oh my goodness. I'm just so bad with numbers and timelines, but it was pretty close, and I was almost 2 weeks over my estimated due date when they started to really, really push, like, we have to have a cesarean now, we have to.
Oh, that's very interesting. So one trust says your baby's too small, and one is saying your baby's too big. And I mean, I laugh. It's hilarious because I know, and so many of us know that are, midwives working in the system, outside, whatever, like these measurements, these screening tools, it is. Oh, if someone would come in and just watch maternity from the outside who had never been a part of it, would just go like, this is insane. What are you doing to women? But the indoctrination and the belief in this to be almost diagnostic and how it's just absolutely bonkers.
Yeah. And, in fact, in a way, the beauty of doing the measurement 2 days apart from one trust to another and seeing the vast difference, just was sheer evidence of the absurdity of the whole thing. Like, what are you actually even talking about? And yeah, it really, it also made me, in a way, stronger, because I was like, I knew that my baby was fine. And when I saw that, it just was, evidence of, this is nonsense. Listen to yourself. Listen to your intuition.
Yeah, this is why that's so important, isn't it? I just want to say that, because I do work with doing birth trauma healing sessions, right? I have a lot of clients from all over the world that come to me for that online. And it comes back to that all the time. Trusting your own intuition above these screening tools and the experts outside of that, really trusting yourself. And it's not something you can just do then. You like build this resilience, this connection to your inner voice, your intuition, your mama wisdom, your gut feeling, whatever you want to call it. Like, you need to practice that so that that's there, and you actually do trust what you're feeling, And yes, you're going to be swayed and yes, you're going to be influenced, but the stronger you have this connection before pregnancy, through pregnancy, it's going to be easier to stand your ground and listen to yourself as well as the quote unquote experts around you.
100%. Like that is, in fact, anyone who talks to me about, birth, I say just exactly that. Like the most important thing that you have is your intuition. And so rather than spending time, doing anything, whether that's, reading or listening to podcasts or going to classes or hypnobirthing or whatever, like spend time with yourself and make sure that your intuition. And like you say, it's a practice. It's something that you can actually practice and even test out. You can even play little games with yourself to measure your own intuition in a way, if that's something that you need, sort of evidence-based intuition.
So what unfolded then after going to the second trust? Was your baby still breech?
Yeah, so this is what I actually wanted to say as well, was because, it was COVID, there had just been some law passed in the UK and Europe about private midwives and their insurance that they had to have to attend home births. Because obviously when this was happening, I contacted a whole lot of private midwives because it seemed that all the trusts, there was only one trust, which was Guy's and St. Thomas's, which had a qualified breech birth team. None of the other trusts, 2 other trusts, had any qualifications for breech birth. They didn't have any training for it because obviously they're like, oh, baby is the wrong way around. We know what you need, a cesarean,
So when you birthed your first baby, that was in the UK then?
I was in the UK. Both my births were in the UK, yeah. And so I contacted, I think it must have been about 12 private midwives, and they were all like, oh, your baby is breech. Oh, so cute. The bum is at the bottom, and they've got their own way of coming into the world. And we love breech births. They're so hands off. They're so quick. Normally, like, just the most beautiful, fun kind of births. And all of them said to me that there's nothing to be wary of, just to make sure that whoever is in your birthing space knows how to work with breech. That was important, for the safety of my birth and my baby. And so, of course, I tried so many private midwives. No one was able to help me. And then there were no trusts that had qualified breech birth teams except Guy's and St. Thomas's. And so I went there and, as I said to you, got the weird measurement. But then also was received so beautifully there, because now the scenario was that Guy's and St. Thomas's was not in my catchment area. And so I could have a vaginal birth, but it would have to be, in the birthing suite, in the birthing center. And so that I could have breech qualified midwives at my birth. And this was all fine until, the new measurement, which was now that the baby's too big. And now there's this idea that because it's my first birth, maybe I won't be able to birth him breech because he's too big. And I got sort of a promise from the consultant midwife there that she would inform all the staff of my scenario, that I wanted to have my baby, now in the birth center, and that he was breech, and that, I was sure that I wanted to have him in that way. And when I arrived, when I felt I was going into birth, it was just the most beautiful thing. And I just felt so... You can feel the window opening between you and the worlds in which your baby is in, and the worlds of spirit, divine light, heaven, whatever you want to call it. And I could feel that window open, and I was loving it. My early labor was just so beautiful and so powerful. And then my doula came to my house and we started to have this conversation. I just knew that if I went into the hospital, it was all going to go pitong. I just knew it. And yet I was just between a rock and a hard place, because I didn't have the breech support at home, and I was, guided by the midwives that, I should have someone who was qualified with breech births to be at the birth. And so I had to go into the hospital. And now I was in a scenario where initially they had said, it's all good. And now there were a few red flags because he was too big. And when I went into the hospital, I was... it seemed that the people that were there were not informed. The people that she had said would hopefully be around were not on shift, and the people that were there were not informed. And so what happened was I was in triage, laboring on my own. My doula was outside, my husband was outside, and essentially what happened was I was just trying my best to keep my birth bubble. And I think I was there for 8 hours. And during those 8 hours, I was brought a clipboard with a form on it for consent for a C-section. And I told them over and over again that I did not want it. What I wanted was what we agreed upon, was that my husband and my doula could come and we could go into the birthing suite together. That is what I wanted. And, I fought. I was so angry with myself for a while afterwards, but when I think about it now, I fought like such a lioness, to eventually start to feel immense pain and not have any tools with me, not have my husband with me, not have my doula with me, not have the support that I was, promised going into that trust. And eventually, at one point I even went outside and I was standing where the elevators were in this horrible bright lights, just so I could hold my husband while I was in labor, just so I could be with him. And eventually I signed the form. And when I signed it, I remember so clearly, I said, just so you know, this is not consent. I have been bullied into this. This is me actually saying, I don't have it in me anymore. And you've been waiting for this moment. And now I just need to move this along. I need to, have this baby, because I can't do this anymore on my own in this environment.
Yeah.
And so that was it. That was, thankfully, once we were in the OR, I had a beautiful playlist playing, and we had, skin to skin, and there were a whole lot of things that we had in the birth plan that we had done with the doula. I was even resistant to do that because I was so adamant that I just wanted to focus on how I wanted to birth him, and how I really believed and knew that my body could, and I was designed for that rite of passage. But I was grateful, and I felt actually once we were in the OR that the people were wonderful. And that was my birth with him. And postpartum, I had a very difficult time with breastfeeding. He had a tongue tie. I was telling them there was something wrong in the hospital. They just kept on sort of gaslighting me. It was the weirdest, I'm allowed to swear, it was the weirdest mind fucking that I felt like I was in this alternative reality. And it was so incredibly, I would just for days afterwards look at him and just cry, because of course, I loved him so deeply, but I just felt so much pain from the way that that went.
I'm so sorry, Natalie, that that happened to you. And there's so many women who've gone through the years of COVID that were treated so, I don't even have words for what has been done to women and babies through these years in maternity care and birth. What was the reason that they kept you in triage for 8 hours?
I really don't know. I think they didn't have. I don't know if they were waiting for the birth team to arrive. I don't know if they were waiting for the OR to be available, because also then once I signed the form, it was another 4 hours before I actually had my C-section. And by that point, I was flipping raging.
Yeah.
And I actually, I took a swab because I wanted to, I put a swab to get was it like the vernix, so that I could, I knew I was now going to have a C-section, and I wanted to, I can't remember what it's called, but when you wipe your baby.
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, it's called seeding, and you can put like a little piece of cloth or something up your vagina to make sure that it's full of your beautiful juices that, your baby's supposed to go through the vagina to get. The vernix is actually something that's on the baby's skin, so that's not from you. But yeah, it's called seeding, and something that is very much recommended when you have a cesarean.
Thank you for the reminder. So I had now gone into that mode of like trying to make the C-section as mine as possible and as beautiful for my baby as possible. And so, yes, I was now I was wanting to do the seeding, and then I noticed like it was really uncomfortable, and I took the bit of cloth out, and I saw what I knew was meconium on the cloth. And I, knew that that could be quite dangerous. So I just started to kind of angrily tell them that they had to stop keeping me waiting and help me with my baby's birth now.
And it can also be normal especially with a breech baby coming out bum first, that they get squeezed and
Yeah.
meconium comes out.
Yeah, and actually, there was no meconium in anywhere else. He literally just pooped, and it went out of his butt and straight out of mine. So it was just,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm so grateful that I experienced that, because, I too hold space for women, and I work with women's voices and expression, and helping and supporting people to step into their power and discover their voice and all of that kind of thing. And I felt so like chastised, I don't know the word, like my voice box was removed during this experience. And to feel that, and to now have to, heal that post his birth, and to accept myself and to love myself, and to know that I had done the best that I could with what I had, was such a journey and such a process. But in doing so, it helped me to be able to support others with that too. And it also helped me to prepare for the most beautiful day of my life, really, which was birthing my baby girl. So immense gratitude. And, there's definitely, for anyone who may be having a VBAC, there's a healing that happens when you have this opportunity to do what you knew that you could do, what you knew you were designed for, what was part of your rite of passage as a mother. there's this healing that happens. And I feel like birthing Noah in the way that I did helped me to heal a lot of the pain around the birth with my son, Yali. So I have so much gratitude, even for that pain and that struggle, and help me to understand people a lot more and women a lot more in the birthing space and what they might be experiencing. I felt like with my birth with Yali, the energy that I needed was the warrior. It was the tiger's eye. It was warrior energy. And when I went into my birth with Noah and into planning my birth with Noah, I knew that I didn't want any warrior. I wanted softness, divine feminine flow, purple velvet, being held and feeling warm and safe and cozy. And so interestingly, when I spoke to my doula, I really feel like it took us a couple of conversations for me to explain to her how important this was. And the thing is that I think that doulas do so much work fighting the system. You know, they're in constant warrior mode because there's so much to fight about, actually. But I do feel that, that it's not always, what you want, and it's not always what you need. And I knew that going into my birth with Noah, and I really advocated for that with my doula, whenever she was almost about to kind of go on a tangent about, I would say, you know what? I just want this to be gentle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you are a birth worker that mostly attend births in the hospital system, that can become your only worldview. But if you also attend home births, birth center births, free births, your energy is very different because you don't have to be that kind of advocate and warrior for your clients. It's
Yeah,
important to have
that,
the mixture, I think.
that makes sense. Yeah, yeah.
So, did you know when you got pregnant again from the get-go that you wanted a free birth?
Yeah, I think I did. I think it was very, I think I learned a lot from my previous birth. And I was going to keep my birth safe at all costs. I can, for me, and in the work that I do, words are so important and are so powerful. And so, for example, I was finding I was listening to birth visualizations and meditations, and it took me a while to sift through to find ones that were clean. And what I mean by clean is sometimes you'd be listening to this birth meditation and be so beautiful, and then they would say, and even if it doesn't go according to plan or something like that, and I'd be like, whoa, that's not, that's like creeping in for an alternative vision. And I was targeted and focused on my vision. And I feel like, if you're an athlete and you're preparing someone for a marathon, that athlete's not going to listen to a visualization about the marathon and go, and if you don't really finish the marathon and you decide to stop over there for cake instead, then you can always try next time. And you just wouldn't hear that. So
No.
why are we doing that in those meditations? Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. You're so right. And that's the thing, they're just the narratives around like I mean, I'm all for having birth plan A, B, and C, do whatever you need. I think it can be dangerous to be like, I'm only gonna learn this thing and only do this. But when it comes to like do that, then I would say go fully into dream birth visualization. Don't let anything else in. And then if something else happens, you'll deal with it. But like, yeah, of course. I don't think that it's a good idea to just go with the flow. I'm just gonna go to the hospital and go with the flow, and then you're gonna go with their flow. Like, yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was super important for me, and I think in my first birth I did a hypnobirthing course, and I was reading Ina May Gaskin's Guide to Childbirth, and then was it the Positive Birth book? I was kind of researching and reading, and with this birth, I actually made a real conscious decision right in the beginning that I was not going to. I was going to be very careful to everything that I consumed, whether that was listening or reading, and I was only going to let in people or materials that were 100% convicted that if I believed that this is what I was going to do, that they were 100% on board with that. And and then just spent, as I said, most of the time really spending time with myself and my intuition and talking to my baby. And I also had this amazing osteopath who helped me with my first birth. I went to her when we discovered he was breech, and then for support afterwards. And then with my second birth, it was just this incredible thing because I didn't actually need her, and I didn't actually need to go to her. And we would joke about it, but it was about just being abundant and feeling soft and just having support and affirmation. And she's this amazing shaman and energy healer, and she was just like affirming, how sound we were. And one of the things she said to me actually was, I'm going to give you some homework. And I was like, okay, what's the homework? Rebecca, she's called, and Rebecca Davies. And she said to me, you've got to go home and you have got to masturbate and have as much pleasurable sex as possible, and just, open up to this idea that your birth can be pleasurable. And I also was working with, the Annie Ball, and she actually said, she guided me with it, and she said, if you were to masturbate and then get to that point of feeling that pleasure, then you could, in that moment, insert the Annie Ball, and then you could almost, I guess, rewire your brain with, the understanding that you could, this could be pleasurable, this could be opening, as opposed to the opposite, which we've been so ingrained from movies and all of those things. So I think it takes a lot of, work. But it was just light and fun and beautiful to receive, this kind of wholesomeness around going into my birth with Noah. And I think also feeling that I was so worth it, and my birth was so worth it, and was one of the most important things. I think, people spend loads on their weddings and on all kinds of things, and, then to just feel held going into your birth, like, that is one of the most divine investments I think you can make in yourself and in your baby, and in going into matrescence and everything, is to just, have all the support that you need, and even a bit extra, a cherry on the top. Because like I said, I was going to Rebecca, and in a way I didn't need to go at those points, but it was just wonderful. And it was just extra support and extra faith. And, I think also in the birth process, when it came to that doorway opening and feeling that doorway opening between worlds, there were also moments where I could almost feel all my ancestors, all my guides, all my angels around, and all these women, the souls of them present, Rebecca, and, beautiful things that my friend Gita had said to me. And, even though they were not standing in the birth with me, their souls were part of it. And they were all my full 100% I believe in you team that were there. So I feel like I didn't do it alone. I had obviously my beautiful husband, he was there, and I had my doula present, but then I also had all of these, your podcast, all of these wise women, all of these stories and support around me. And I just knew that we could, and we were going to birth and have the most incredible birth, and it was the most incredible day of my life.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So let's dive on into that birth story now, shall we? Do you want to tell us how your labor began?
Sure. So I woke up at about 7:30, and I had the most beautiful night's sleep. And I think this is also from being in tune and being, it just felt like there was a flow right from the beginning. I had this beautiful night's sleep, and I woke up in the morning, and I woke up with my son, and we went downstairs, and I was making him some breakfast, and there was some kind of hue to that morning where I hadn't started labor yet. It's almost like it was bathed in this kind of sepia light. It's like this window where you just feel it's special. And I think, in receiving Noah, there's a morning of I'm now going to be a mother of two, and my relationship is going to change, and the time that we have together is going to change. And while I'm so grateful and excited to receive my baby, and it's also sad in a way that that things will change. And so there was some kind of, I could feel it in the air. And so I was sort of sitting in the kitchen, bouncing on the ball, and then my mucus plug, I was like, that's interesting. And I sent a picture to my doula, and I said, I think this might be my mucus plug. She's like, yeah, that's probably your mucus plug. And, it could be days before you birth, so just let me know how you go. And I had this beautiful moment in the morning where I had breakfast with my son, and I'd made this little, like, ceramic pterodactyl egg cup, and in which I'd finished in a pottery course just before, and I had gifted him the pterodactyl, and he was like eating his egg from the pterodactyl, and he was so happy. And we just shared a really special time in the morning. And then my husband was going to take him to school, and he said, do I need to cancel work today? And I said, no, it's okay, take him to school. I don't know, it could be a while before baby comes. And while he was taking him to school, which is only, sort of 40 minutes, 20 minutes there and back walking, I started to feel very, very intense expansions, I called them, instead of contractions. And I was quite overwhelmed, actually, because it was so quick and so strong and so powerful that I was kind of like, wow, this is, and I think I even had a couple of moments in the beginning where I was like, this is really painful. I hope I can do this. I felt very vulnerable. And so I wanted to go in the shower, and I sat on my husband like squished the pregnancy ball into the shower. It was actually very funny. Pregnancy ball in the shower, and just had the hot water running, and it was just blissful and really, really helpful, feeling the hot water. And then my husband contacted my doula and said, yeah, it's, happening. It seems like she's progressing quite fast. So she came over in a couple hours later, and I was finding the expansions very, very painful. And I had one of my birth meditations, birth visualizations, which I basically just had on repeat throughout the birth. That's all I wanted to listen to. It's a 45-minute long visualization, and she just said all the things that I wanted to be said. This birth was just, this particular meditation just blew me away. And then there was 45 minutes after that of music, and we just had it on loop. And I went downstairs, and I was now on the sofa, and my doula arrived, and the pains that I was having was actually like, in my lower abdomen. And in hindsight, I do think that maybe was actually pain from my previous birth that was showing up. And I asked my doula if I could we started to use the TENS machine, and I asked her if I could put it on my belly, if that was safe for me and the baby. And she said, yeah, you can put it anywhere. So I had it on my belly, and it was really, really helpful. And then, she seemed to be a little bit concerned about something, and I she said, she asked me, when you have these, this pain, is it constant, or does it come and go? And I said, well, I feel like every now and again I get a bit of respite, but the pain feels really constant. And she said, well, that could be, my concern is that you could have a uterine rupture. And so, I was so calm, and I just said to her, okay, well, how can we rule out, without going into the hospital, is there a way that we can rule out that it's that? And she said, yes, we can check your blood pressure, and we can check the heartbeat of your baby. She said, but we would need to call the midwives to do that. And so I said, okay, and it's so funny, because in a way, I think although it was incredibly painful, I think I knew that I was okay, but in a way I was also wanting my doula to feel at ease at this moment. So she called the midwives, and the midwives came, and actually the midwife that I had spoken to a couple of times, and I really didn't even, I think I went into the hospital just once or twice, it was one scan we did. That was like confirmation of the pregnancy. That was it. We never went in for anything else after that. And so I had this midwife who was, huge advocate of home birth, but she was away on leave. And she had warned me that, there were going to be other women who were going to step in. And the woman that came, there were two women. The one who actually was the leading one in the scenario, I just didn't want her energy in my birth. I could feel it straight away. And the other person, her name was Imogen, she was just so, she got it, and she got me. But this other midwife, she was she had like a clunkiness to her, and I was in the pool, birthing pool, and she had to do my blood pressure 3 times, and it was so distracting, and it really annoyed me. And then I heard them sort of whispering in the corner of the room, whispering, and I just said to Scarlett, my doula, I said, Scarlett, get them out. I don't want them here anymore. We've got the blood pressure. Listen to the heartbeat. Get them out. I don't want them. So so what happened was, apparently for some health and safety law, I had to tell them personally. So now I was on the toilet, and I had the clunky midwife come up to me while I'm on the toilet and have to hear from me that I'm telling her to leave. And it was just so infuriating. And I just, said, please go. I don't want you here. And we just continued with the birth. And it was, very quickly, just once they left, it was very easy to just drop back in, and to know that, we had that assurance, we got what we wanted, and we could just continue with the birth. And my husband was amazing. He, was really great with setting the pool up at the right time, like getting the temperature right and everything. And my doula also she said, at one point she said, we should go up and down the stairs sideways. And we went up the stairs. She was like, it just helps the baby to come down the canal a little bit easier. And I remember getting up to the top of the stairs, and then and then thinking, how the hell am I going to get down again? Because that's where the birth pool was and everything. It just felt, so difficult. And ended up, going for a little walk outside in the garden as well. And I was so cared for with, coconut water and probiotic drinks and fruit. And it was just beautiful to not actually ever want for anything. It was just between my husband and my doula, I didn't have to ask them for anything. It was just, they were just there. And so that just made it even easier for me to just be so focused and so tuned in. And then I had the moment, actually earlier on in the birth, where I had said to my doula, I had said, this is so painful. I don't know if I can do it. And how will I manage when it gets to the pushing part, And she said, the pushing is completely different. Something else happens. There's a whole other energy flow that happens, and it's not the same as this. This is, your painful bit. And when I was in the pool and got to that pushing bit, she was right. I felt that bearing down energy, that those waves, helping me to bring baby down. And I also felt her. She was so active in meeting me and coming out, and it was like a conversation between me and her that we were having. And I'm so grateful also for all my history with my voice and working with my voice, because the sounds and the connection to sound and to sounding was strong, was like there was mooing and roaring and just like primal amazing releases of sound. And I think it really helped to not be afraid of that, and to just completely surrender to that, and to know my sound. It really kind of helped me to focus and to connect and to breathe and to just work in that rhythm together. And we kind of got to this point where I was in the pool. I had like a cup holder which I was squeezing. I squeezed my husband's hand so strong. He says to this day, he's like, you've got such like petite arms and hands, baby, but I've never felt strength like that from you. I thought you were going to crush me. And at one point I wanted to bite something, and they were just so responsive. He just put a cloth, and I bit into a cloth, and it was just amazing, because I kind of saw his hand and I thought, I'm going to bite his hand, but then I thought he'll end up in hospital. I will take a chunk of his hand out. But there was just such a flow and such a knowing with each other in the space, and feeling that support. And I really wanted Yali to be present. And I'd spoken to him about birth, and we had watched birthing videos together, and he was like, wow, that's so amazing. He's just as much of a birth geek, I think, as I am. But it was complicated. We couldn't get hold of his nanny that day, who was, prepared to pick him up from school and everything. So he never actually ended up being present for the actual birthing bit, which I still have a kind of sadness about. But yeah, he wasn't there for those moments. But when we came to that part, and I could feel her head, and I could feel this, like, she had thick black hair, and it was like swooshing in the water. And I could feel her head, and I said, baby, feel her head. She's coming, and he stuck his hand and felt her head, and I think he just was so surprised to feel so much hair. It was so cute. And then just really, continued to have that rhythm. And it wasn't very many. I think it was about 6 pushes that I did. And she literally just popped out, and I just swiveled around and picked her up out of the water and held her to my chest. And it was just so divinely sacred and beautiful. We did it. We did it, and she was just perfect. And I held her close, and she cried, and it was just the most beautiful healing moment to have gone through what I went through with my first birth, to then have this beautiful moment and experience. And there was my baby girl, and she had been born in this softness and in this sacred warmth and fuzziness and coziness, and a knowing of my power and her power, and the conversation we had in making that happen. And that was at 20 to 5. So, it was about from about 8 o'clock until 8:30, I would say, when I started to feel my expansion strongly. And then 20 to 5, that she was in my arms, my baby girl.
Beautiful. What a beautiful redemptive story. And I'm also so curious about how, so was it NHS midwives that just popped in and popped out in the middle of that?
Yeah, it's funny as well because they had literally said that that has never happened before, where someone had, popped in, then popped in, I got what I wanted, and then I told them to, not even nicely, I really just kind of been like, okay, you can get lost now. And Imogen, the midwife that was like, she had come from another trust actually, and she was like a backup. But I just, you can just feel, and I think especially when that veil is so thin, you're so tuned in and you're so aware of energies. And I could just feel that her energy was, what I vibrated with. And that the other woman was just, I couldn't wait for her to leave.
Yeah.
And when I told him to go, Imogen was so kind of, yeah, you got this. We don't need to be here, But yeah, they just left. And then when I birthed so my cord was actually, I wanted to lotus, to have her, with a lotus birth. And I didn't know how long I wanted to keep the placenta attached, but I thought, I would just feel into the moment and see how I felt. But when I was in the pool, the cord was so short that I could barely bring her high enough to the breast. And so we waited for about 20 minutes, and then we cut the cord when the cord was clear. My husband actually cut the cord, and it was very intentional and very beautiful. And the birth of the placenta is so interesting because you just kind of, everything's around the birth. And but I've learned so much about the placenta, and it's such a sacred organ. And I had placenta drops created from my first birth, which was very helpful and very healing. And we also did a placenta burial, which was also very healing. And so I just had this love for the placenta, and that was very quick and easy. And in that there was quite a lot of blood in the water, and I could feel something sort of flapping out of my vulva. And I thought it was like the part of the cord, so I kind of tugged on it, and Scarlett was like, maybe don't tug on that. That's my doula, Scarlett. She's like, maybe don't tug on that. And I was just so high and happy. But, she said, there is quite a lot of blood in the water. And, I think we should just call the midwives in to check if there's a tear. So they came in, we called them, they basically did a check, and it was so interesting because I can't remember her name, but let's just call her Clunky Midwife, was like putting the gloves on, and she's like, I'm just gonna. And I was like, no, you're just gonna not, actually. I would rather that Imogen did the examination, And so she was the one who was sort of from that trust and leading the birth, I guess. I mean, leading, whatever that means, but she was appointed to the birth. And there I was just, actually, no, I don't want you touching me. So can please, Imogen will do this for me. And Imogen, took a look, and she was like, I can't see well enough, but you might have, a 3rd degree tear. And then I was like, okay, so what does this mean? And she was like, well, if you do have a 3rd degree tear, then you have to go into the hospital to have stitches. And I was like, is there any way we can, see before we go into the hospital? And she was like, no, I've examined as much as I could. We need like proper light. I was on the sofa, all the curtains were closed. There were like candles and music. It was all like, the birth bubble. And at this point, my son had come home from school and he'd met his sister, and, and I was on the sofa just totally blissed out. I mean, I did not feel pain at all. I was just in such a state of bliss. And, and it's so interesting. And then even then they were like, okay, well, we're going to call the ambulance. We're going to, we'll get you to the hospital. Da, 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 da. And I was like, whoa. Like, firstly, I don't want to go in the ambulance. Secondly, this is not an emergency. Thirdly, like, can you please, call the hospital and tell them that I'm coming, and tell them that I'm in this birth bubble, and I don't want to be, I want that to be respected, and I want that to be held sacred. And it's just amazing, because the moment you advocate in that way, everyone just follows suit.
Mm-hmm.
There's no pushback. There's only pushback if there's uncertainty, because they think that there's a maneuver. But when you're certain,
Mm-hmm.
it's like everyone just goes, yes, cool, And we drove in our own car. We went with the baby. It was me, my husband, and my doula. Oh, and I wanted to share this. I was on the sofa when I received the news that I may have to go into the hospital after this incredible experience, and I literally just burst out crying. I was just like, I was devastated. And my son came to me and he said, Mommy, it's okay. The doctors can help you to get better, and then you're just gonna come straight home, And he was just so wonderful. And I mean, he was looking at my perineum, and he was so curious, because obviously I'd shown him so many birth videos, and and I didn't mind. I was, the midwife Imogen was like looking in there, and he was like looking in there. And it was like a lot of blood and stuff, but he was just so, I think, had seen it so much before that it wasn't, scaring him, and he could see how happy I was. And, I think also part of him healed in the feelings that were around on that day, And yeah, so then we went, I remember they were calling us, because we stayed at home for like another, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours. I was just like not in any hurry. We would get there when we would get there. This time is sacred. I know that, unless I feel like faint or whatever, that there's no kind of emergency here. It's fine, And we got to the hospital, and it was just, I've never actually seen a hospital work like this, but they had been given the message. Like, Natali was coming. She just had the most divine, natural, perfect home birth. And she's in this birth bubble, and don't you dare, like, interfere with that. And so we arrived, and we were in this, we were in the, like, kind of the OR, but they had, it was dark. Oh no, we weren't in the OR, actually. We were in like a birthing suite, because I'd said to them, I don't want to go into like, operation room. Can we go into the birthing suite? This is what I'd said at home already. So it was, there were the fairy lights on, and it was all very quiet and gentle and so consensual. Like, is it okay to come in? Can this person, they asked me, I think there was like a trainee, I said, no. Like, only whoever needs to be, helping me with this, like, that is it. And they came, and they, I remember the the surgeon having a look and going, it's not a third degree tear. And we were all like, yay! Me, my doula, my husband, Noah, because that meant that he was going to just do some stitches and I was going to sleep at home, in bed with my baby and my husband and my son. And that time is just so, so special. So it was a huge celebration. And even going into the hospital and whatever, it didn't break anything because he was so clear about how sacred it was. And it was just magical to even be taken to a place where I had experienced trauma before and to be the boss, to be in charge, to be like completely respected and listened to wholeheartedly. So that was kind of healing too, in a way, I had basically had as much of a second degree tear as I could have before it going into a third degree tear. So it was as big as it could have been, but it was on a third degree tear. So it was just, thank God for that. And yeah, my doula said maybe it was my daughter's hand that sort of was presenting on the side of her face, which can sometimes cause a tear. But yeah, that was my story with Noah, my baby girl.
Beautiful. And so when you knew the whole time you were going to have a free birth, did the NHS Trust know that?
Yes.
Right. So you had already told them that I'm going to free birth. And they
Yes.
still were happy to come. And I mean, that's a great setup. I'm really actually proud
Yeah.
over that NHS Trust and how they handled you as a woman who wanted to free birth or, have whatever help you wanted when you wanted it. And they seemed, from your story, really to accept that. And I know that in many places, that would not have been accepted and maybe you know what I mean, like, and also they might been reports to child and social services and all kinds of things, and I'm really impressed also by the care you got.
Yes. Me too. Me
Yeah.
too. It was wonderful because it was, when I think about it now, it was very, like, I led it. I led, you know, okay, how do we make sure that, it's not a perennial tear? We do this and this. Okay, that's what we needed. We don't need them there. We just need that assurance. Okay. And, it's interesting because I think there were so many scenarios where they were quite surprised, you know, like, for example, with the ambulance at the end. And they'd never, like, I don't think they'd ever had someone also say to them, like, I'm not going in the ambulance. It seemed like they just knew that, like that's just what you do. Oh, you got a tear, let's go in the ambulance. But I think, as I said, I think when you have that clarity, they also, at the end of the day, like, the mother decides. It's mother led. It's your right to decline or accept or have whatever bits of care that you feel are instrumental and part of your birth. But yes, it was an incredible. I think that's such a big thing you've touched on, because I think, like, that could be available to anybody in the
It should
UK, and that
be.
was available to me, even in my case, in a way, with my birth with Yali. And had I think, again, it just comes down to that intuition and that clarity
Yeah.
of just being like, I'm clear about this, and then people rise to meet you there. They're there for you. They do what they do because they want to see births like the one I had. They want that to happen. Ultimately, maybe they get sucked in along the way to various rules and things, but they, the beginnings of that is because they are moved by the wonderment of birth.
Mm-hmm.
And
I remember being, working in hospitals, and I loved when a woman came in and was just knew what she wanted. I loved to serve her. We're so many of us in there just waiting for you to say to us what you want. And then there'll be the opposite too. But there are some amazing people within maternity care who just wants you to step up and claim your birth and claim your pregnancy and let us, help you do that. And we can, right? So we can just document whatever you want to decline. And it is your show. And I think what you're saying is so important, that it needs to come from you and you need to be really clear on it. And when you are, most of the time, people respond. Even maybe that doctor who always don't. Like when you just are like, you can sense when someone is like unwavering, just like, this is how I want it. And then you can be met in that. And there's no room for that wishy-washy, no room for like, oh, I'd like this if it's okay. Don't say that. Like, this is what I want. This is how I want my birth to go. This is how I want you to do this and this and that, right? The clearer you are, the more direct, in a very kind, gentle way. Like, you don't have to be forceful about it. You don't have to be rude about it. You just, this is what I want. Actually, a lot of people would just follow suit. So I'd love to hear now, if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
Thanks, Anna. So definitely, I would say that your intuition is your most powerful tool, and above all else, spend time, a lot of time, sharpening your intuition tool and connecting with yourself, your body, your baby, and then, only surround yourself with people, places, things, podcasts, movies, whatever it is, that are 100% convicted of your innate ability and birthright of passage as a woman to birth your baby. And that's really important, because it's interesting how sometimes just little words can create doubt and second guessing. And the other thing which I want to say, which is something that I have so close in my heart, is know your voice and know your sounds, and give yourself space to, I think for a lot of women, we still come from a societal background where we have to be amicable and we have to be, not too loud and not too powerful and not too bossy and not too this and that. And so I think that there's, for the amount that you have to advocate for yourself to have that clarity in your birth, knowing your voice and your sound and what you are clear on and what you are, what you want, just makes it so that you don't have to meet those moments for the first time in your birth. You can almost practice your sounds, whether that's actual sounds, through voice work, or any breath work or whatever it might be, or actually saying, no, I'm not going in the ambulance, or okay, you're all done now, you can leave, whatever it is, being able to advocate for yourself and use your voice to give yourself and your baby your dream birth and what you want, and that follows then also into matrescence and into the becoming of a mother, because you can really feel like you're on your own team in that process, especially when you've had a birth like the one I did. It was very hard for me to be on my own team with my cesarean, post-cesarean. But after the birth that I had with Noah, I felt invincible. I was like, wow, I am more powerful than I ever even knew. And there's nothing that I cannot do. And, it gave me so much conviction in my place as a mother and as a woman, and just how important we are in society. So yeah, know your voice and know your sound and step into it with conviction and clarity. And like you said, people will meet you there. People will take your lead if you just show them what it is that you want. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and your birth stories with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna. I really appreciate it. It was very special.
Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as The Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.
Pare, happy birthday parehas na tayong 40, no? So naalala ko nung mga bata pa tayo, madalas tayong magkasama, madalas tayong magkakwentuhan, babahaginan tayo ng mga istorya, sa bawat isa. At na-miss ko syempre yung magkasama tayo nagiinuman, no? Sana magkaroon ulit tayo ng chance, no, na makapagkwentuhan, makapag-inuman, at makapagbahagi ginan uli, no, ng mga kwento natin, no, sa ating buhay. So happy birthday, pare, and isa ka ng family man ngayon. Ang dalangin ko ay sana patuloy kang pagkalooban ng Diyos ng malakas na pangatawan, malakas na isipan, malakas na kalooban, para magampanan mo yung mga tungkulin, no, bilang isang padre de pamilya. So I wish you all the best, no, as you celebrate your 40th birthday. So happy birthday ulit.